Hey, everybody, hold on one second. I'm just going to share this out to everybody in the audience, all my groups, all the things, so we can get some people in, and then we'll get the show started. So hold on one second. Okay, almost done. Okay, everybody out there, welcome to At the Gardens. My name is Garrett Wilhelm. I'm the CEO of Creative Gardens Early Education. We are a company that provides personalized education schools to Loudoun County and beyond. We have Creative Gardens Ashburn Village, as well as the Ohana School opening in 2021 in Aldie South Riding. Super excited for that. As always, we have amazing guests on the show. I like to personally provide as much value to you guys, the viewers out there, as possible. And today is no different, my friends. Today is no different whatsoever. Today we have somebody very special on the show. She is an old friend of mine. We go way, way back, an old former colleague from my first ever school that I ever worked at, Sunset Hills Montessori School in Reston, Virginia. She has had a journey, and I'm not going to tell you about the journey because we're going to ask her about that journey that took her all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe and Portugal. And I can't wait to talk to her. She's had a really cool career. I've kind of kept up with her over time. That being said, my friends, I'm about to introduce you to one Susie Joyce. So hold on one second. We're going to have her come in. I'm going to unmute her, of course. Hold on one second. Oh, I'm going to unmute her. There we go. Susie.
Hi.
Yay. All right. Wonderful. We are here. We have you on the show. Everything works. We tried it twice before we got it right, and now we got it right again. So thank you so much for doing the show with me today.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, of course. And so what I'd love to kind of ask you first, and then you tell the viewers, is talk to me a little bit about your career in education that led you to be doing what you're doing today. And of course, what you're doing today. Our viewers want to know. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Thanks so much, Garrett. So like Garrett said, we kind of go way, way back. In fact, to one of my beginning places in education. And I'll bring it to where I am today. But basically, I started out at a Montessori school in Reston, Virginia, working actually with Garrett. And in that path, I really fell in love with the Montessori philosophy and the pedagogy and the materials and just how absolutely explicit it was as a way of teaching. And that led me to actually deciding to go abroad with that experience and teaching Montessori to Portugal, where I ended up getting a job opportunity. And in that process, as a teacher, being in the classroom every day, I always had this question: why is it that sometimes children, they're getting the concept, no problem, and other times it's not going through? And that opened the door for me into understanding greater how children learn to read. Specifically, how does the brain learn to read? And that led me to the path of getting trained in the Orton Gillingham approach and getting more familiar with the David Kilpatrick approach to phonological awareness and how to reach those kids where there's sometimes a gap or something just isn't clicking. And so while being in Portugal, I started my own business as it's called Dyslexia Portugal, working with children with dyslexia, and also bringing in a lot of my Montessori experience. And so now I'm here in Portugal, in a different time zone, and super happy to be here.
Yeah, so that awesome. And I've kind of kept track of Susie and her career. And, she was teaching at the same school that we worked at for so long. And I was in the aftercare kind of getting my Montessori education. I think I got mine a little bit before you did, right?
Yeah,
My
I think
Montessori
it was
certification.
2 years. I think it was
Something
2 years
like
before.
Yeah, and so I had gotten mine, and was still kind of managing the aftercare as well too, while also teaching a class. And then Susie went, and she was an assistant in the class next door. Kind of fell in love with the philosophy, went and did her training. I had left, I think, by then, and have just been so kind of proud, to be honest with you, of what you've done, and to one. Pursue Montessori in a place. Now, you don't do yourself enough justice. Portugal didn't have any Montessori schools, from my understanding.
There were some, but they weren't. There's different training institutes, and so because Portuguese, the native language Portuguese, there weren't. They were more Montessori-esque, and so what we were opening was a really credentialed and official Montessori school, and it's still my first love, absolutely. And mentioning Susie, I can tell you how important that approach has been to being able to reach each child individually, because it is so individualized. You think of the child as an individual, and how can I reach them? And it's still my first love.
That's awesome, and it's interesting because we have a similar path there. I want to make sure that your name pops up here too. Bing, there we go. But we have a similar path in the sense of I was in a Montessori classroom thinking, Montessori is awesome, and I do love Montessori. But you have these children that you keep asking them. Montessori has a joke where because Montessori is so independent driven, and we're trying to inspire children to be intrinsically motivated to learn, to seek out knowledge, to kind of occupy their own time. You would find these stragglers who were kind of off in the corner, and the teacher perspective in most Montessori schools was, what's wrong with the child? And that to me was like, well, that child's 4. There's nothing wrong with a 4-year-old child. They're a beautiful, wonderful brain that's just developing and just figuring things out. Same thing. If I'm really looking at the learner, right, for who they are, then why am I limiting myself to a specific pedagogy, to a specific philosophy?
Yes.
And then that, for the same reason, I'm sure it dove you into, dyslexia and that training and trying to understand how kids read specifically. For me, it was more on a macro. It's like, well, how do kids learn specifically? And how can we kind of create a best practices of all these different approaches? So it's super cool to me that you were inspired to do that. And I'm wondering, and I'm curious, what sort of kind of aha moments did you have when it came to, what spawns a child to read, and how different is that for every child?
That's a great question, and you pointed out a few things that I've thought a lot about. Like when it comes to these different pedagogies, there's always, there's always going to be something that you can pull from another one that maybe the one you're using is not exactly the right thing for that child. And so in my search of having, in best practices, is you're going to choose the best from each program that you can find. And sometimes what's best for one is not best for another. So the process of being a really good teacher and a really effective specialist is to never stop researching, to make sure you find what works for each child. And in the path of working with children, what is important to make sure a child is really learning to read. Now, the thing that a lot of parents and even, myself, I can say that wasn't completely clear until I dove deeper into literacy and the way the brain works when it's learning a new language, is that before you even consider letters, before you consider books, any of that, there's a ton of prerequisite skills that have to be firm in place before the child's going to grasp letters, sounds, and how they fit together. And that was kind of the gap I kept seeing at times with children. It's like, well, I'm doing all the things that I'm trained to do, but why isn't it not working? And it was those prerequisite areas, things like phonological awareness, can the child take three sounds that they just hear and put them together into a word? You know, that is the fundamentals, the beginning steps of just being able to pull apart, segment, and blend sounds together before you even see letters. Being able to have really good visual discrimination, the differences between a B and a D. Can we describe what's different between those two? And I always use this analogy for parents when I'm first work with them when I'm talking about a child with literacy difficulties. When you say to a child that has dyslexia, what does that word say? You know, let's say you're reading. What is the word? You know that word. Come on. Well, what you're doing when you say that, it's imagine that there's a closet full of clothes. None of them are on a hanger. They're everywhere. And you say, find the pink shirt with the pocket. Now, the child cannot do that because they do not have the organized strategies in the brain to be able to find that shirt that you're asking them to find. And you'll see it on their face when you say, read that word. You know that word. And they go, I don't know, you know? And so what prerequisite skills do, things like phonological awareness, orthographic mapping, being able to automatically read the word without any delay when it's mapped in the brain, those skills need to be really foundation, really concrete before a child becomes a fluid reader. And so, yeah, I really love that analogy because it really makes you think. You know, we take it for granted when we're reading that we just go da, 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 da. And for a new reader, that is a massive task. They're using multiple parts of the brain having to work together. Not to mention that reading is not a natural skill. It's learning to speak is a natural skill, but humans didn't learn how to. Reading is something that evolved. It's not something we always did. It's not something we naturally attain. It's something that has to be taught. And for these children with dyslexia, they're that 40%. They say it's 60% of children who learn
Wow.
no problem. 40% need an explicit instruction of reading. And if they don't have an explicit, very clear understanding of the sounds and the rules of the language, they are just lost slowly throughout the system. That's
That's
what I
absolute.
those kids.
Yeah, that's absolutely astonishing in the sense of that number. I mean, 60% of kids read somewhat okay, or, without challenge. And 40% is a huge number when you're talking about the path to reading. And I think we see it as educators in our classrooms. I see, and what I do know from all of it is that every, of course, learner has whatever that challenge may be. It's a little bit different than the one next to them. You can have two dyslexic kids sitting next to them, and the variance there, the spectrum there, is broad. I mean, it's such an important thing when you think about Montessori and you think about the phonetic learning and the phonetic awareness and the importance of phonetics. I always joke with parents that say, my kiddo. Of course, we hear this all the time. My kiddo's so smart, which I think is great. I think you should have all parents should feel their kids are the smartest kids in the world, because smart is subjective. There's no like definition of smart, right? So, but my kid knows how to sing the ABCs. And I'm like, well, that's a song. Your child memorized a song. And even more so, you're learning the letter names, which have very little value to the application of reading, right? Like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. Like,
only with one exception, which is the vowels. Those are the only ones that they need to know, the letter names. But the rest, you're right.
Yeah. And so we learned when I was in Montessori training, we learned, instead of saying A, B, C, D, E, F, G, we learned so like I can do that and recite it pretty well. The other part about that was, and something that was really enlightening to me when teaching and obviously talking about the importance of phonetic awareness, is that a lot of Americans, specifically with English, put an A sound on the letter of a lot of the, you know what I mean? Like ba or ka. Yeah, ba or ka or duh, like.
They add a schwa to the end. And then when they're reading and they're trying to blend and they go ba-atta, ba-atta.
Ba-atta?
Ba-atta? What's ba-atta? You're so close. Okay,
Yeah.
snip. We have to snip that snip that ah. Now what does it say? And so that's why it's so important that teachers are teaching the right phonemes and graphemes when they are introducing those sounds, because later that really does become a stumbling block. And parents.
So let me ask you this, and I think parents, if you guys are watching, parents, make sure that you're remembering this because it's so key. Like we keep talking about when it comes to early phonetic awareness, it's key that when the child is making these brain connections, these almost permanent brain connections between the ages of infants and 6 years old, you want to make sure that you capitalize on that. And by capitalizing, meaning rather than introducing the sound at every letter, getting it right. And like you said, snipping that sound and introducing the sounds before you introduce the letter names, with the exception of vowels. Let me get that right. But, what I'm really interested in, of course, is beyond kind of, dyslexia and what you're doing when it comes to phonetic awareness and working in Portugal is, we talked a little bit yesterday about there was kind of a pinnacle moment for you, where you are in a classroom, in a Montessori classroom, having a great time teaching in Portugal, beautiful Portugal. You've kind of found a life for yourself out there. And then there comes a moment where you say, okay, I'm going to step into the world of entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. So was there a specific moment where you were like, well, okay, I guess I'm going to do this? Or was it kind of a collection of moments that there had to have been something that forced you over? And I'd love to know that little moment for you.
I think it's more of a collection of moments. But one thing I think that really stood out to me was when I started working one-on-one with children in this capacity, using my training and my certification in Orton Gillingham. The passion and the excitement I felt of that one-on-one connection with a child, as opposed to being in the classroom where you do have that one-on-one, but sometimes it's somewhat watered down.
It's scattered and watered down, yeah.
A whole bunch. And then also you get to really see those aha moments. You're watching it in front of your eyes. That child just got it. They just got it. And sometimes in the teaching environment, sometimes you see that and sometimes you miss that moment. And I just found it so, I would lay in bed at night and I was thinking, how can I make that better? How can I reach that child? And it consumed me in a very passionate, exciting way. And I thought, why not? Why not do this full time? Why not make this, and also I thought about all the kids in classrooms where, teachers are amazing. They can give and give and give and give the best instruction, but sometimes that one-on-one time is still essential for some children. And I wanted to be that person, because, in a team effort, the team teachers working with the child during the school week, I'm in touch with a lot of the teachers of the kids I work with because we are a team. And so for me, making that leap was following my passion and my excitement and my joy, and I'm really happy about it.
And I think that what a testament to, I think entrepreneurship is a very brave thing to do. So, I'm big into that. We talk a lot about this on the show. We talk also about the importance of teaching entrepreneurial concepts to children. And more so what you're saying, which is following your dreams, going all in on what you're good at. Mm-hmm. Like all of these messages to children are very key and they're important because, it is possible. And that I think was the most exciting for me was that you were taking something that you found that you were really good at connecting. And I've seen what people don't know is Susie was my daughter's teacher, my oldest daughter's teacher, Sophia. So, I've seen the way that Susie connects with her kids and it's really special. And I think there is, and that kind of leads me to my next question, which is there is kind of there is a practice or a skill in making, because I think that's key, right? To connect with the learner, to connect with the child. Is there exercises that you use that are consistent with each child to kind of open their door up to not being so, because what I do know is that whether it's a learning deficit or a learning difference or a neurodiversity or whatever it may be, there is a stigma of I'm not good enough that comes with that, right? There's a stigma of a child with dyslexia. Specifically, we can talk about that, where a child struggles, they look around, everybody's getting it with ease, they feel like crap. And that's like obviously not a good place to learn. So tell me a little bit about, is there consistent ways in which you connect with your kids? Is there games that you play, anything like that?
That's a great question, and you're absolutely right, because when you're working with children, with neurodiversity that have a different way of learning, they often come to you already somewhat broken, and I hate to use that word, but it's a bit like they have had enough experiences in their school life or with their siblings where they felt less than, or why am I not getting it? And of course, we're leaving off all the amazing strengths that these children have that are far superior to, those quick readers. But just speaking about that, it's so essential that they feel seen and loved and cared about before I can even dive into introducing rules. And this is even more true with the older kids. The older the child, the more work has to be put in place to connect on a really special level. And so in terms of activities, it really, what I often do is I try to find out, what do you love? What interests you? And I will make things and create activities that make them feel like, this is for you. I made this for you. Something special for us to do. A lot of question games. Let's just talk about, okay, I have a game which is like a getting to know you game, and it's got little cards with questions, and I'll read them and I'll say, okay, it says, tell me about your favorite family tradition. What's your favorite food? Conversation. I want to know about you. And oftentimes you'll see those strengths in that moment, in those moments. But it does take time, and it's important for them to feel like they have those strengths and that I see them. So a lot of, wow, that's such an insightful comment. I don't mean just like filler, congratulatory good jobs, because those are proven to not be very effective for children. But to use qualifying affirmations. Wow, you worked really hard on that, and I can see you should be really proud of yourself. Those kinds of statements that make them feel seen and appreciated. And then they start to open up, and they're willing. There's my favorite quote. Actually, I think it's from Dangerous Minds. Where's that quote?
Say that one more time. Susie, hold on one second. Say it one more time.
Children don't care what you know until they know how much you care.
If I could drop this mic, I would. And that's so true. I think let's kind of sit on that because and unpack that a little bit, because it's really important to me that parents out there know that is, in a Montessori world where you and I kind of grew up in education, there's this stigma around good job. There's a stigma around what we're talking about in some senses. There is a play on words that's really important that I think is very important. But I think ultimately it's a mixture. It's a mixture of, a child looks to an adult because an adult establishes boundaries, and a child is looking for boundaries, and not just behaviorally, just in life in general, right? And so in those boundaries, a child needs to feel like they are, like you said, calm and comfortable. And so there's this mixture that I like to play that I think is so important, which is, making sure that they know that, one, I'm there for them, two, that I care about them, and three, that I'm proud of them. I think that that's a really important thing, coupled with you should be proud of yourself. What do you think? I mean, I say so many times here at the school when a little kiddo comes and shows me like this, like, Mr. G, look at this, look at this. Do you love it? Do you love it? Do you love it? And I go, well, what does it matter then what I think about it? I think it's great, but what do you think about it? Is this something that you love? So whereas we came from an environment where it was like, no, you never say good job. You never ever do that. For me, It's about meeting those two in the middle and saying, like, yeah, like, I am proud of you, but what do you feel about this work? And especially when it comes to, because like we were talking about earlier, reading is a struggle for clearly 40% of the population. And so if you look at those numbers, then, we're not just serving one kid in a classroom with we're serving multiple children in the classroom with the ability to feel accomplished when it comes, even if it's a slow burn to learn to read. Children have to move forward, right? Mm-hmm. And they have to feel like the momentum is moving forward. So I think it's so good that you just said that and said that quote, because it's just so insightful for parents to understand. Is like, so many parents sit, Susie, with their kids at homework and just yell at them, like, do your work, get it done. Why can't you do this? Why can't, like, it becomes this, like, even teachers, it becomes this like never ending grind where the learning doesn't go anywhere. So listen to this. I'm pointing the wrong way. Listen to this lady, because she definitely knows what she's talking about when it comes to that. So we talked a little bit about the bringing that comfort, bringing the regulation down. That's an industry term. Regulating the child and getting them to a place where they're comfortable in learning new things and making mistakes. And that's the key, right? You said that's the key?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Exactly.
Yeah. So that being said, talk to me a little bit, and this is a good segue because this is something I wanted to talk about. You created this business. You have kiddos coming to your house. You do virtual work with kiddos. Obviously, with COVID, that has made the world turn upside down. Talk to me a little bit about your experience. Talk to me about where you were in March.
Well, yes. So, and it hit us a little bit before it hit you.
That's right.
It's a little bit harder. Maybe we'll say that. At least on the East Coast compared to where we were. Now, Portugal's a bit of a bubble. You almost never hear about it on the news, and a lot of people still think Portugal is Spain. It is its own country. It's next to Spain, but it is its own country with its own language.
Which is Portuguese. Yeah.
Which is Portuguese. Anyway, but so for March. Now, schools shut down in March, and we went fully online immediately. And that had successes. Some schools were a bit more successful in that process. When everybody was prepared, right? All just trying to make it work. And that period took the school year ended later. In June, beginning of July.
Okay.
The summer's a bit shorter here. Well, they go back a little bit later too. And so that's how the year finished. Everybody online. And everybody's in school again. The whole country. There's no schools closed because of COVID. There are families that have opted to have a virtual experience where certain schools have made arrangements to do an online thing, but for the majority, everyone's in school, and there's certain regulations or suggestions in place in Portugal, like temperature checks, hand sanitizer, windows open all the time, a lot of outside play. So out of the classroom, shoes off before entering the classroom. They've done a lot of things to keep the bus moving. And we don't really know what's going to happen in these coming months. Let's hope it stays the way it is. But I know there have been some changes to play times too, like classes play separately and in different areas. There's a bit of a bubble. Kids know they have to stay within a certain distance, and there's little circles at the front of the school where families stand separated before they enter the school. So everybody's kind of just picked up and carried forward. I mean, big kudos to the teachers, because it's been a big undertaking.
Yeah, that's really, well, our area, Susie, right? Like, I think, well, first of all, the cases are going straight up. So things are getting a little nerve wracking here. We have obviously two large public school systems next to each other, Fairfax County and Loudoun County, both of which kind of follow in suit with each other. We've had now we're just now sending our K through 2 kids back on a very limited schedule. So they go 2 days a week. And we, of course, here at the school support Loudoun County Public School learners. So I have, now almost 45, almost 50 elementary school kids here. I have basically my little private school that I never thought I'd have here. But it's been really interesting. And it's really interesting to hear the perspective of a different country, especially from an American, an expat, if you will, is to kind of get a sense of, kids go back to school. There is measures put in place. Do you see, is there that same sense of urgency there in schools to keep your kids safe and is there that, I won't say even urgency, I'll say fear. Is there that same sense of fear in Portugal than there would be in the States?
I think so. I think that the one thing that pushes things forward maybe is that it's really essential that people get back to work here. I think the economy here really depends on that. And so I think, there's, and Portugal's been through some crises in the past. They've experienced really difficult economic tragedies in recent history. And so there's really a fear, maybe not so much of COVID, but of the country. And so there's a push, like there's just no choice. I'm noticing more and more people just like, just need to carry on, like we're not going to stop and freak out. We just need to go. And the thing too is that there's less of a resistance, I think, here to wear masks and to just follow what the government says. There's just a carry on, mentality.
Interesting. Well, obviously, I mean, you probably watch the news. It's just all over the place here. A lot of us.
I'll tell you, they announced on the news we recommend everyone wear masks outside. If there's anybody on the street, you need to be wearing a mask outside, in addition to inside and any public spaces, and only with this number of people. I think it's a party of 5 can be together at a time. And the next day I'm driving, to a house and I look on the street, everyone's wearing a mask. There's no big hoopla. There's no big protest. They're just, okay, he said so.
Well, obviously here they burn cities because of it. So, it's
sorry, I'm not laughing at that.
No. It's I think for the first time, and that's important to talk about, especially when it comes to kiddos, is I think there is especially in the States, there's an underlying sense of anxiety that every child is experiencing right now. That is just, they're feeling that energy of such turmoil, of such unknowing. We're in an election year. It's a big one. And there's so much division in this area that kids are really feeling it. And it's sad because, you think about a kiddo with dyslexia or something like that. They got enough going on in their schooling to get going. And I really feel for kids that are, especially dyslexic, the kindergarten, first, second, third grade, that are distance learning and also struggling with dyslexia. And the last question I wanted to ask you is, how, you're the expert, how do parents start to know that there's an issue? I mean, obviously, you and I know that most 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds will write at least 1 or 2 letters backwards consistently. And I personally wouldn't call that dyslexia. I would call that they're figuring stuff out. You know what I mean? But what are some really key signs that you'll see that are like, yep, this kiddo is really struggling with dyslexia?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the reversing of letters, because that's usually the first thing that everybody thinks about when they think of dyslexia. And what they say is it can take up to 8 years old before a child really and without dyslexia, to know how to form that S the right
Thank
way,
you.
or that B or that D. It's not something to go, oh, I think it's dyslexia. It's now, what is dyslexia? It's the first thing to wrap our heads around before we start to think about, well, where is that? It's basically, in fundamentally, it's difficulty with matching sound to letter, and that creates traffic jams in the brain because reading becomes more difficult because you're asking them to decode multisyllabic words in third grade and comprehend what they've read, and to be able to infer what's the author trying to say when their brain is still struggling to put the sounds with those letters and how to understand it. So that's part of it. It's not entirely just reverse noise.
Hmm.
And now, for a parent, what do they do if they start to think, there might be something? The first thing I would say is, if there are enough of those red flags being like, they've seen that sound, that letter many, many times, and you've practiced it, and it's still not connecting. Um, that kind of thing, or with an older child, the difficulty with reading comprehension, understanding what they've read, being able to fluidly read a word that they've seen many, many times, that they should be able to whole word read it, stable read the, and they're still going to and they're still trying to connect some of those dots. The first
Yeah.
thing I would say is, first of all, don't diagnose your child. Trust somebody to give a proper assessment, a reading specialist, somebody who's trained in educational child psychology, that can put that child through some tests and figure out what is the issue, because there are many gaps that can be in that hierarchy of reading and writing, and you have to figure out what those are before you can treat them, before you can see somebody like myself who's an interventionist, and we'll figure out what those gaps are and how to help. And I would do it. I mean, the thing is, you cannot diagnose a child until they've had 2 full years of reading instruction. So that's second grade. However, studies say that children who are treated by 6 years old, around 6 years old, which is before the 2 years of instruction, will have a much more better ability to read.
I've
So
heard that too.
those don't coincide.
Right.
So you may not have a diagnosis, but you can still start an intervention. And I think an intervention is much more valuable in any case, because that's going to support that child through the long haul. So yeah, the first thing would be, if you really feel there's something, is to reach out to somebody who is certified, that can do a proper assessment and tell you what they think. Because even if they can't diagnose, they can still say there are signs of or symptoms that could be. That will help you have a little bit more direction on getting the support your child needs. And then, in addition to that, if there are those things, we really have to be patient with these children that are learning to read. I mean, those young kids, it's a massive task to learn to read. It's not a quick, oh, they just got it and they just go. It can take a long time. We have to be really patient and sit with them as they're reading every single sound in that sentence. Because sometimes, if we are too forceful on those children learning to read, that can actually have the reverse effect
For sure.
with those children, and what we want is a love of reading. We want them to be excited about it, and we have to be patient as they're learning.
Yeah, I would 100% agree in that, in the sense of, learning or reading in general should be something that is enjoyable. And if you're, and really that's, in my mind, for the kids that have ended up being dyslexic that I've worked with, there's a certain point where you have enough phonetic awareness and enough ability to read 3-4 letter phonetic words and maybe some phonograms, things like that, where it clicks, right? And there's this sense of enjoyment that comes with it, like, oh, the entire world is filled with these words that give context to the world I'm experiencing, right? So there's this big light that goes off. Yet you have kiddos that really struggle, and it becomes this really tedious thing. The question that I have, and then we can wrap up, is when a child is dyslexic, and I've thought about this so much, right? The body, the mind is very good at what's the word, accommodating or adapting to certain issues, things like that. So if a child's dyslexic, right, and they use almost a memorization base to do that. Mm-hmm. Meaning, let's say they can't decode the word or decode a letter in the word, yet know that word says X, Y, or Z as that symbol, even though that symbol might be mixed up in their brain. Do you find that, like, if you catch a child that's dyslexic at 16, 17 years old, is that really hard to kind of undo those pathways that they've built to I'm missing the word right now, to accommodate their learning difference?
Yes, it is massively much more difficult. I would say at, the prime age for a reading intervention is between age 6 and 9. Once they get past 9 years old, not to mention the workload at school and the demands, it multiplies by so much by that point. The brain has lost its elasticity at that point, and it's much harder to introduce these concepts that, it's absolutely super important to get them when they're younger. And then you can really, it's also easier to go back to some of those basics with a child who's younger. When they get to older, it's frustrating because children with dyslexia, we haven't talked a lot about the strengths, oftentimes the strengths that come with dyslexia, things like emotional intelligence, just off the scale. I mean, I've had conversations with children that I just think, are they older than me? Like, they're just so insightful. And so, I mean, the interpersonal skills that they possess, the ability to pick up on these really nuanced, body language, and big problem thinking, like seeing things from different angles, and also spatial perception, being able to see something from different angles. And there was one child I was working with, and I gave him some cardboard, and he created this like a 3-dimensional moving part toaster thing. And I said, this shows how your brain works in a way that can do these kinds of things. Like, it's amazing. And I know that in school we're taught, oh, you need to be a good reader. This is what school values, good reading. But we can't forget about strengths that our schools sadly don't always or give value to, and that will carry them, to the moon, once, and then we have to feed those strengths. I think I've got off topic.
No. You didn't. I think that that's really important in the sense of what to kind of wrap that up is, a child with dyslexia, they're feeling that they're learning different. They're feeling their neurodiversity in a negative way. So what Susie's saying is, because of that, focus in on their strengths that we wouldn't normally quantify as, again, I hate the word smart. I think it's the dumbest. I think it's the dumbest word out there, because smart implies that we know there's a prototype of what is intelligent in our world, where every child has a gift, every child has a talent. And I think, that speaks to that. A child that struggles with dyslexia is kind of, for the same reason a child is deaf, their vision is honed. If for the same reason that a child is blind, every other sense is honed so that they can accommodate for that issue. So it's actually, you didn't get off topic. That's actually very much on topic. But that being said, gosh, the last thing that I will say is I'm going to be putting together a panel pretty soon of all my previous guests. We would love to have you on to kind of talk. We're going to talk about some more macro subjects. That way we can have different insights from different people, not just so focused on dyslexia. But the way we end every show is, Susie, tell the world, tell the states where we can find you online.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So my business page is dyslexiaportugal.com. And that's probably the easiest way to reach all the contacts that are involved. And I also have a Facebook page and an Instagram, all under Dyslexia Portugal.
Yeah. So, Susie, thank you so much. It's been so awesome reconnecting with you. I'm so proud of you as a friend and a long ago colleague. It feels like forever ago, right? But and just so happy with what you're doing for kiddos and affecting their lives every single day. My friends, please visit dyslexiaportugal.com. I think you could get a lot of insight there. And from what I know, Susie puts out some really great content as well too, to kind of help out around dyslexia. So definitely check that out. Thank you again so much for doing the show. I'm going to have you jump off. Remember to check Susie out. It's been so fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this show today. We're going to jump Susie off so I can close up the show. Bye, Susie. Thank you so much. All right. And my friends, thank you guys so much for tuning in today for At the Gardens. As always, we have amazing people. It's late where Susie is. And I'm really appreciative that she's doing this with me. So as always, from At the Gardens, keep your head up and keep moving forward. We will see you for the next show and the next guest. Remember, you can find all the previous episodes on creativegardensva.com or the Facebook page at Creative Gardens VA. We also have a YouTube channel, Creative Gardens Early Education. Check me out. I give Montessori lessons. I do all kinds of tips and tricks, all kinds of fun stuff. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you soon. Bye.